It can seem that all podcast hosts are the same and difficult to differentiate between them. So in this video, we're going to tell you 8 things you need to consider when choosing a hosting platform. Before you pick a podcast host, let's talk a little bit about what podcast hosting is and how it affects the distribution of your show. We'll talk about some of the features and capabilities you should look for when deciding on which podcast host to choose. Just like you need a website host to store content like pictures, written content, forms, etc., you need a podcast hosting platform to host and store the media files for your show. Most podcast hosting platforms come with additional features to grow your following. If you know what to look for in a podcast host, it's easy to select a platform that meets your needs and will simplify your podcasting experience instead of complicating it. When recording a podcast, you create an audio file that you need to share online with your audience. You could host it yourself, but then you'd need to manage the bandwidth and storage, manually updating your RSS feed when each episode goes live. A podcast hosting site provides you with a place to store your files, an RSS feed to distribute to the directories, plus additional features to help with growth. Here are the 8 considerations when choosing a platform. The amount of storage a podcast host offers can impact how many episodes you can release a week or how much access your audience has to old content. It can also affect how many people can download or listen to your show at a given time. The amount of storage provided by a podcast hosting site determines the number of files and file size that you can host. Bandwidth would affect how much content you can upload or download from your host. This directly influences how many people can access your podcast at one time. So as your audience grows, so will your bandwidth needs. So you have to make sure that host can deliver your content as needed. Now, not all podcast hosts will limit your storage by bandwidth, with some newer hosts opting to limit by download numbers, but just make sure you check this when you're making your decision. Analytics allow you to better understand your audience, which is essential to the success of your podcast. Advertisers have been using these insights for decades to make decisions about their programs and advertising budgets. Even if you aren't a numbers person, having a basic grasp on how your podcast is performing can help steer you in the right direction when it comes to creating engaging content. The right analytics will also show you which platforms people use to listen to your show. Make sure that the analytics provided by the podcasting hosting site are IAB certified or at least IAB compliant. The IAB, or Internet Advertising Bureau, has set standards that a majority of podcast hosts use when looking at analytics. If your analytics aren't certified or compliant, they may not provide accurate information, which could lead you to make poor decisions regarding your show's content and advertising. If you plan to use analytics often, check with your podcast hosting platform features. See if they offer the ability to download and export your numbers so you can work with them more extensively. Although a website isn't essential for your podcast, it's a really great way to promote your show and engage followers. We suggest looking for a podcast hosting site that can easily integrate with your website. This can save you headaches as you progress with your podcast. Podcast hosting features aren't particularly useful to you if you don't know how to use them. So take time to research the features offered by a podcast hosting site. We suggest searching for screenshots and YouTube video that go through a hosting company's dashboard. You'll see how everything is laid out and the technical knowledge to use the podcast host features effectively. You can also sign up for a free trial if this is available to learn the ropes before committing to a subscription. Alternatively, you can subscribe to the channel for our upcoming videos where we'll be comprehensively comparing the podcast hosting platforms. All podcast hosts provide a player to let listeners stream your show across the internet. You'll get an embeddable code that you can paste into your website or blog. It then appears as a handy player for your listeners. Have a look around at the various players and see which one you prefer, based on how it looks and the function that it has. Some players might be more aesthetically pleasing, others might make it easier for you to share your show on social media, or make it easy to subscribe to your show, which will increase the chances of growing your audience. As you grow your show, you'll want to start looking into how you can start to monetize and turn it into the dream job you've been looking for, or just a nice extra side income. Different podcast monetization streams are relatively new, and advertisers and podcasters are still really trying to figure this out. However, some podcast platforms have started to put emphasis on building features to make this work. Some hosts provide dynamic ad insertion, which inserts a different ad read into pre-selected slots based on factors that you set, such as location. This can be especially useful for shows that are scaled into multiple markets and need to provide location-based advertising for those different markets. Also look for premium subscription capabilities and educational resources offered by the podcast hosting platform. The best host will allow you to manage premium subscriptions. Forward-thinking hosts may also like writing about topics like gaining sponsors and cross-promoting with other businesses, which could prove very helpful for your show. Check to see if your podcast host offers word-for-word transcriptions for each of your podcast episodes. If you can find a podcast host that will create them for you, you don't have to spend time doing it yourself. You might not have considered it, but here are some of the benefits of a written transcript. Having a transcript of your podcast can make the show accessible to those with hearing impairments. If they have a written version of your show to follow along with, they can enjoy your podcast when they couldn't have before. A show transcript can also act as SEO content when published on your website for listeners, which can improve your search ranking. This will also make it easier for new listeners to learn and engage with your show. If you have a transcript of your podcast, you can have additional content that you can repurpose for other things. For instance, podcasters use excerpts from their transcriptions for online content like blog posts, which means more potential SEO juice and traffic to your website. When it comes to a podcast hosting platform, we suggest investing some money in a paid subscription. Many hosts have a tiered pricing, which can give you an idea of how much of a budget you should look for in your podcast hosting, as your podcast gains popularity and you need more resources. The cost for a podcast host will usually be variable based on storage, bandwidth, and downloads. So have a clear idea of how much of each you'll need before committing to a podcast hosting subscription. Choosing the podcast hosting platform for your show requires some planning. When budgeting for your podcast, set aside plenty of funds to get the best podcast hosting platform. You can find many podcast hosting sites out there, but not all of them offer the same features and functionality. Do plenty of research to understand which will be the best platform for you. It will pay off in the long run. We're going to be producing a bunch more videos on this YouTube channel about podcasting, video interviews, and more. So if you want to learn about starting and growing your podcast, make sure you subscribe to the channel and turn on your notifications so you don't miss an episode. Thanks for watching.